John, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, I used to be an apologist, and now I consider myself a counter apologist. I studied with some of the best apologists, names you might not recognize too well. Paul Feinberg is one. James Strauss is another. I studied with some apologists who are now out there apologizing. Paul Copan, and my major mentor was William Lane Craig at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, where I earned a THM in the philosophy of religion. And I was a minister, and I tell people I've married lots of women. I buried a few too, and I just thought my way out of the faith. Basically, it took a crisis, but other than that, I had learned the arguments, and all of a sudden they started making sense. And I did some further research, and I couldn't believe anymore.
Cool. So what is your position on the arguments? What are the things that you are most interested in talking to other Christians about?
Well, I consider I've written or edited 13 books, and they've gotten some high praise, and for that I'm grateful. I wish they were better known, but I didn't choose maybe I didn't choose some extremely popular book publishers. I went for the easy kill on publishers that would get it out quickly. Prometheus Books, of course, is one of the better known, if not the best, atheist publisher in our generation, and they published about 4 or 5 of my books, so that got my name out there. And my my focus at the present time is on miracles and horrendous suffering, and I've got a couple books here. My latest books. I really am happy about. I'm happy how they turned out. There hasn't been a book from an atheist perspective on horrendous suffering, and I think that's where the death knell of all attempts to exonerate a good, all powerful God from evil, from suffering, is horrendous suffering. And I wanted to put out a book on miracles because I think that, and that's my focus, is that there really is no objective evidence for any of the biblical miracles. I focus on biblical miracles because the people who believe in biblical miracles will see miracles everywhere, and so they're more likely to see a miracle here or there. I'm not focusing so much on those types of miracles, the ones that seem to be extremely rare coincidences. I'm focused on the biblical miracles, because once I can convince somebody that there really isn't any objective evidence for any of these miracles that are told to us in the Bible, then they're more likely to hear the other arguments from, say, Joe Nickell, the only full-time paranormal detective, and Michael Shermer, James Randi, and others. It's my focus on miracles and horrendous suffering. I think those are the best ways to convince people out of their faith, if they can be convinced at all. And I'm not so sure very many of them can be convinced, but they do seem to trickle in. And yeah, I guess that's all we can hope for.
For sure. Have you done much research into the modern miracle claims? Like Craig Keener wrote a 500-page 2-part book about all the miracles he thinks there's evidence for.
Well, I've got 2 chapters in this book on Keener's miracles. One by Dr. Darren Slade, and he shows us how to properly investigate miracles, and it's with Keener, with focus on Keener in mind. And Keener's investigative ways just were not evident in his books. He just simply took any story. He even tells us that. I'm just going to catalog a bunch of stories that people tell me, and there was no fact checking going on. And all of the ones that I know of were simply rare occurrences that took place in extremely unusual circumstances. That doesn't by itself, though, mean a miracle took place. I mean, for instance, if a doctor says, you have a 1 in a million chance of being healed, and then you get healed, then all that means is that you won the lottery. And people win the lotteries. I mean, given that there are 7 billion people on the earth, someone is going to be healed of this illness, whatever it might be. And that's not a reason to believe in your sect specific God, whether it's Allah or Adonai or Jesus, or the Mormon, or and because that's what they do. There's a miracle, and God's doing all these miracles, solidify these faiths of the people who are at war with each other. So it seemed like to me that if there's a God who is making these kinds of miracles happen, then he's bolstering the faiths of those people who go to war with each other. And that doesn't seem like all of a sudden that you get into the problem of horrendous suffering.
For sure. And so you said there's never been a book written from an atheist perspective on horrendous suffering. What is your take on it from the atheist perspective?
Well, one thing about horrendous suffering is that the usual attempts to try to solve it don't work. They can't work. I mean, I have a chapter in that book on animal suffering, and it was focused on the law of predation, the be killed nature that we have been given by supposedly a good creator God. These animals, first you show that they're sentient beings. They feel pain, at least in the upper species. And then you document this kind of suffering that they go through. William Rowe has a test case where he talks about a fawn who slowly burns to death in a forest fire. This kind of suffering, not just to be killed, but the hunting and everything seems like has to eat to live. The standard response that this motivates people to be better, like in humans, like suffering causes us to be better people. It makes us be good to others. It makes us help others. The standard lines like that, they don't work because you're talking about animals. You can't teach a cat not to kill. See, so that doesn't work, and neither does it. Is it because they suffer because of sin? I could say the Adam and Eve story. So those kind of responses don't apply to animal suffering, and so it really puts them up against the wall on that case to try to explain it. And then they go to the fall. Well, they deserve sin because of Adam and Eve. Well, that's really bogus for a number of reasons. One of which, of course, is that there was no Adam and Eve. The sin wasn't such a grievous thing, and animals there's just no reason to punish animals for something they didn't do. So horrendous suffering is one of those kinds of issues that should have been brought up, I think, decades and decades ago, when a flurry of books, started being made, and it's getting some really good reviews from atheists, and Christians alike. So it's really interesting to see the backlash, and really, I don't know why it hasn't been too much, at least from the Christian side. Paul Copan says he read it, and it's a really good book, but he doesn't have the time to respond. So I get that, but if there's a knockdown, drag out case against a good, omnipotent, omniscient God, it's trying to reconcile that God with horrendous suffering, by far, hands down.
And horrendous suffering, do you specifically focus on animals? Because that's what you were talking about the mostly.
No. We have a chapter on the Jewish Holocaust. We have a chapter on childhood suffering, and there's a chapter on the unequal distribution of suffering by William Patterson, who talks about the fact that there are unequal suffering occurs from white men to black women, to people different genders, and this is unequal suffering. Why does one type of person deserve more suffering than another type of person? And that's a good chapter. So yeah, we focus on concrete cases because philosophers, they want to talk about, well, what is suffering? In fact, I got a Facebook message from some fellow when I had announced the book. He said, "So what's your criteria for what counts as horrendous suffering?" And I really, sometimes I'm not always that kind. I just simply laughed, and he didn't like that. But you know, you really have to demarcate the exact point when suffering is too much. You just don't. There is that midpoint level where all of a sudden this is too much suffering. That's not enough suffering to cause us to doubt in God. That sidesteps that kind of question, because horrendous suffering is on the other scale entirely. It's like being burned alive. You know, it's watching your child being raped and then slice your own throat. I mean, there's you don't ask questions like that. I mean, horrendous suffering is concrete, it's undeniable, and apparently there's a God who sits down with popcorn and watches it unfold and does nothing. And that presents a really serious problem to an omnipotent God who sees it and doesn't do anything about it. Because the more you know of the suffering, the more you have the power to alleviate that suffering, and the more you care to dictate how much you respond. I mean, you can apply that same standard from humans to God. If we don't know about the suffering, we can't be expected to do anything about it. If we can't help, there's not much we can do. And if you don't care, it's another thing entirely. But with God, he's supposed to be all caring, all knowing, and all powerful. So he has the biggest obligation to help in those cases of horrendous suffering, because that's my focus. I don't even have to talk about the other kinds of suffering. I mean, there might be a kind of suffering that isn't horrendous, that doesn't cause us to doubt God's existence. I mean, I gather that. I get that. It can be true. For instance, if you fall down and you bruise yourself, that might be a good lesson on how to learn how to walk or ride a bike. But that's far away from the kind of suffering that people get when, in war, their eye gets plucked out or something like that. So that's something that can be alleviated by a good God simply by, if he's going to judge us for our sins, then he could simply note our intentions to do evil, and then change our mind, or do away with the thought, and so noted. You sinned even though you didn't even act it out. So it just really presents a serious problem for a good, omnipotent, and all-knowing God.
So what about the free will defense, that if he does that, then we don't have free will anymore?
Oh yeah, glad you asked those kind of questions. Keep up. The free will defense doesn't work in our society when we know there's a child molester on the loose who is a repeat offender. We don't simply slap him on the hands and say don't do it anymore, or we don't release him into the society, nor do we a rapist or an axe murderer or something like that, or someone who's inclined to throw bombs into homes and stuff like that. We lock them away. We take them out of society, and that's restricting their freedom. You see, we're not going to give you the freedom to do bad things. And I argue that the same thing should be applied to God, which also applies to Satan, if he doesn't exist, of course. But if you want to believe in him, and that is, it's utterly reprehensible for God to allow this creature, this pure evil creature called Satan, to wreak havoc on us. Because apparently he's stronger than us. Apparently he's evil. And to simply say, well, I'll let him go ahead and do his thing, and then I'll rectify with everything in the end. That's utterly reprehensible for a good God. Simply lock him away, not in the future, now. And God didn't do that, apparently. So
I think the argument goes something like, we need free will, because if there wasn't free will for us to do bad things, then we'd all just be robots. And creating robots that are just like your slaves is immoral. And so God can't create slaves. He has to give us the option to do bad things, because it's the only way to make moral beings.
Well, the whole thing about moral beings, there's all kinds of good questions. The whole thing about moral beings is God could have created us as moral beings in heaven. Just create us in there, knowing in advance, if he has foreknowledge. That's one option. That we wouldn't do evil. We wouldn't do harm. So you're completely free to do whatever you want. I'm just going to create you in heaven. Um, the idea that, but what I'm talking about, what I'm focused on anyway, in regards, is horrendous suffering. See, I'm a white male, and my mom tells me anyway, I'm not butt ugly. So I've been created with a lot of privilege in my life. I've never gone hungry. I haven't been in the hospital at all, for any kind of surgery or thing. Emergency room for a little bit of stitches here and there, but nothing else. And so but I've experienced suffering, unbelievable suffering in my own life, mental pain, just desperation, depression, and almost everyone goes through fits where they consider suicide, and I have had those too. I've had a lot of suffering in my life, failure that has tested me to my core, and so if I'm any indication of the fact that you can be tested to see how you respond under certain conditions, given free will, then that should be enough. So I'm focused on horrendous suffering, and God could give us a free will, but when it comes to horrendous suffering, he should cut it off, and he should know the demarcation point where that becomes too much. I mean, like the kind of suffering that you can't outlive. That's kind of suffering that causes people to actually commit suicide. The kind of suffering that ruins a person's life, or damages them irreparably, or turns them into moral monsters. So that kind of suffering. I'm only speaking of that kind of suffering here. That's the only thing I have to focus on, and I do, and that's the kind of thing we should not have the free will to do. God could turn baseball bats into marshmallow cushions every time we want to go hit somebody over the head with them, and so noted, that you were about to hit him, and then mark it up against them, and we would just think this is how the world behaves. I mean, we wouldn't know any different. And another example I use in the book is the Indonesian tsunami of 2004, which killed about a 250,000 people. Some of it was because they didn't purify their water, before drinking it. But others were just drowning. I mean, that could have been stopped easily by an omnipotent God, because supposedly an omnipotent God can stop earthquakes. So all he would have had to do is stop that underwater earthquake from taking place, and then the Indonesian tsunami would never have killed so many people. And if God is truly omnipotent, then he could do a perpetual miracle and never allow that earthquake to take place in the future either. I mean, after all, isn't creation nothing but a perpetual miracle? God could do plenty of perpetual miracles, unless he's too lazy to do something like that for people he cares for. So there's all kinds of things I mentioned, all kinds of things. There's a lot of things in nature that God has already created. I think starfish can grow new limbs, and some creatures survive on the nutrients of photosynthesis. The starvation thing would go down drastically if God had done that with our bodies.
So the typical argument would be something like, God has a reason to allow all those things, because even those are evils and those are bad. It will lead to a greater good in future. So if he didn't allow the greater suffering, then the benefits that you would accrue, like in heaven or something, wouldn't be as great. And so the fact that God allows these horrible sufferings actually is the only reason that we will have these greater benefits. And if he didn't allow the suffering, then we wouldn't be able to get the greater benefits later on.
Well, yeah, you're playing the devil's advocate pretty well. I guess that's a good thing. The greater benefits, though, let's say God wants to teach us patience or kindness here in earth from suffering. Well, those benefits are actually not those attitudes, those attributes are not actually valuable in a heaven where there's no suffering. So there's no need to have patience if you're in an eternal bliss. There's no need to show kindness when there's no one in need of kindness. So to say that he couldn't have just simply created us in heaven and with these attributes that didn't have to be learned below. I mean, why would you learn something that will be of no use in the future? You know, is what I would say. I don't get that.
I don't think.
I mean, and if God wants us to believe, then why is it that the problem of suffering, problem of horrendous suffering, is one of the most serious obstacle to beliefs? You know, it's like God is shooting himself in the foot. And by the way, you look in the Bible, he did have feet and eyes and a hand and teeth and and an appetite and nostrils that could smell the aroma of sacrifices. But why would he shoot himself in the feet by providing so much suffering that so many people abandon a faith in a good God? If that's the case, I mean, it seems like he's, another illustration, he's cutting off his hand or his nose to spite his face. So it actually, the amount of suffering in the world is proportional to the amount of disbelief in the world, I would think, at least in the eyes of many people. So it would seem like to me that he's not doing himself any favors if he wants us to believe. It all depends on whether he wants us to believe. If you do, you don't do that. That's what I would say.
I think it's supposed to be like the test argument that the goal of the suffering is, one, to test our faith and give us freedom, because without that, we won't have the ability to make genuine choices in heaven. So like the angels were jealous of the humans because we had freedom to choose, freedom to make decisions, whereas they did not. And so giving us this new ability of free choice, of allowing us to do evil things, is the only way that we can have the true ability to make significant decisions in heaven, to not just be robots. And so I think that allowing us to experience suffering was to give us this ability to have this new ability that other beings don't have. And the only way to get this new ability of freedom is to put us through the opportunity to suffer to the greatest extent that we have so far.
Remember, I'm arguing in this book that we don't need horrendous suffering. You know, I'm not arguing that we might not. I mean, as long as we have bodies, fleshly bodies, we might have to discover some pain in our choices. I'm not arguing against there being no pain, and that means there will be always choices to make. Hard work, by the way, can be pain. You know, you're working on a house, you know, and you're trying to get it done in a certain time period, and so you might have sore muscles afterward, and you might actually bleed a little bit, you know, from a nail gone wrong. So I'm not actually saying that. I mean, I could talk that way. I could embrace what David Hume said when he said, why is it that pleasure alone can't help us make choices, you know, rather than pain? What's so much valuable about pain than increased or decreased pleasure? And I think that a case can be made for that. I just didn't make it. And so, again, I'm only dealing with horrendous suffering, the kind that breaks our backs, that puts us in wheelchairs, you know, when we starve to death. I mean, there's plenty of things to make us choose wisely if God wanted us to choose wisely in what we have. I'm just saying the most horrendous types of criminals, the most sickening type of despots, those people should be locked up, you know, snuff them out of business, you know, that's what I'm saying, you know, don't even create him. I mean, if you have the foreknowledge to know who's going to do that, I mean, you either you do or you don't. Let's talk that way if we want. Then God should have simply not created them in the first place. There's plenty of things to test our souls if that's so much needed for God to do that. So I would say there's no reason for the kind of suffering or the amount of it. None.
Well, yeah. So the question is there's this new thing, this new ability, like this free will ability that other like angels and things don't have. And the only way to get this new ability is to allow all of the suffering to even the gratuitous.
Okay. Yeah. And I deal with that also in my book. It's called, you know, Free Will in Heaven. Now, a lot of Christian theologians and apologists, they will say that people who go to hell, which is nonsensical, there's no reason a finite sin could ever deserve that. One of the biggest reasons not to believe in an omnipotent and all good God is the final solution if it's hell. But the theologians will say, when you go to hell, you are allowed to have complete and total free will, and you can do whatever you want. And you have debased choices to begin with. You've shown yourself to be and deserving of hell, so you will continue to sin in the most horrific ways now that you can. And so hell is something like that, something like where you put everybody who's in hell together and let them fight it out, if you will, and then just include a dash of fire or two here or there if you want to believe in that. So what they say is you have hell. In hell you have free will, but in heaven they will say you don't. They will say in heaven you do not have the free will to sin again. That's one option for them, and that means that there will never be another rebellion. See, they've got to have a way to guarantee that there's no more rebellion like supposedly the angels did in the first place. They got us in this mess because Satan, he routed up a bunch of angels and he said, let's go wreak havoc on earth. That's the storyline. And some of them think that that's when Adam and Eve sinned because Satan was unleashed on Adam and Eve, which all is myth. But so in heaven there was free will and it created this. Well, therefore they have to, in order to be consistent, they have to say, well, in heaven there's no free will. Otherwise, there might be a rebellion in heaven, and over and over and over again. I mean, if you're going to have an eternity of this, then you're going to have that happen over and over and over again. So they've got to say, no free will in heaven, but free will in hell. You see, that's what I've tried to do is I try to point out the inconsistencies in their theologies, and that's one of them.
Well, why do you need? Because I think a lot of them allow that. Say, yeah, there could be. You can still, if you're in heaven, you could still potentially sin and then go to hell again. So heaven doesn't make it impossible to sin. But I don't think like the fall of the angels was really a problem. Like that's fine. The problem what we don't need is the fall of humans. So as long as there's no more like creation of new beings like Adam and Eve or whatever, then I don't think that kind of fall could happen again. Even if the angels could rebel again, that's not really, I don't think, a big issue.
So what would they say of God's choice to create humans then as a result of Satan's choice? I mean, it seems like to me that they'd be stressing the credulity here, because here's an all-wise God who decided this is going to be what I want to do, and so why wouldn't God do the same thing under the same circumstances? I mean, we're actually arguing with myth here, and that's one of the things I deal with in the other book I have on miracles. It's all myth, and so it's really when you deal with myth, any story will do. I mean, just anything you want to make up happens. In fact, that's why I argue with regard to Christianity itself. It's all invented. I mean, God's invented. I mean, there's no God. This is how people come up with things. They invent things, and it sounds good at the time. They can explain things, and so then because they didn't explain things well enough, you needed a God for that. So we're dealing basically with all myth here. So you could find anything that might seem reasonable, but on the surface of it, it's just making things up as you go. And I would think that if they have to do it that way, then I think they've already exposed their own apologetic as just simply making things up. Because if the wise God doesn't do the same thing as a wise God did before, then either he learned something which he's not supposed to learn because he's supposed to be all-knowing, or he's not being consistent.
We got a super chat from Don. He has a question. Can horrendous suffering be described as sentient beings finding joy in harming other sentient beings?
Well, that's the problem of ethics. We talk about ethics, morality, and we were trying to find a morality that is good for everybody. And somebody's liable to come up and say, well, what about psychopaths and sociopaths? They wouldn't agree to that ethic. Well, there's always going to be the outlier, the exception to any stance on morality. All you can do is you can only just appeal to the moral sensibilities of most people, and others you don't have to do. You don't have to like come up with a morality for them because they're not going to be that way. Sadomasochists. Now I think there's some people who like that in sex. They like to chain each other up and whip each other. That's pleasure. That's not described as pain. So is running a marathon. They like to do it till they get a second win or third win. I don't know how that's possible. I've never done that myself. But some pain is good. They enjoy it. They relish it. They look forward to it. Well, that can't be the kind of thing we're talking about. So it has to be someone actually driving a nail through your eye, and things like that. And someone's going to say, what about people who like that sort of thing? Well, I would say you all I can say at that point is maybe you need to go see a mental therapist or something like that. I mean, usually under most circumstances, most normal people wouldn't want that.
Gotcha. And also we have a super chat from James Earl. Thank you for the super chat. Paycheck just has been given, so take part of it. Keep up the good work, debates and conversations. Thank you, James. Appreciate it. So you're talking about morality. I'm a moral realist, so I think there is an objective morality. And I think that we're going to have to make an objective model of morality when artificial intelligence is discovered. We're going to have to give it some kind of a moral model to act off of. And I think there are definitely better and worse models we can give it. Like eating babies is probably not a good moral model to give an AI. What is your position on that? Do you think there is like a best model of morality that we can give to an artificial intelligence or to humanity as a guide system to actions?
I tend to agree with you. I saw the debate that Sam Harris provoked on us, and Richard Carrier took up his charge. And then, but I also respect the opinion of cultural anthropologist David Eller, who says it's all cultural, all down. And what I want to do, I think, if I could just remember how I phrased it, because I liked how I said that. I think apes have a certain morality. I think that chimps have a certain morality. I think that there's certain kind of pecking orders in between lions and their tribe that they fall in line with simply because they do. And so what if we did this? What if we said that as far as we know, Homo sapiens sapiens are the same species? Well, then don't you think that since we've all evolved as one species, that we shouldn't have some of the same morality that helps us get along? And I make a distinction between basic morality and conflicting morality. Like conflicting morality is like, what would you do when Nazis knock on your door and say, do you have a Jew inside? Well, or like you got a trolley, a car, you got to run over one baby or 10 kids or 10 adults. That's conflicting morality. That provokes all kinds of different reasoning. But basic morality is under usual circumstances, don't lie. Under normal circumstances, don't cheat. And I think, and we go on with some other things. And we also have a tendency to treat our kin better than people who are not our kin. And that should just simply be realized as part of who we are as a species. And I think that science helps inform what that should be. And when I say that, I mean this. By and large, human beings are empathetic people. If we know someone is suffering and we have the ability to help, and it's not too painful to help, then we generally help, or we feel grieved that we can't. I think most everyone who's a Homo sapiens sapien would feel that way. Now, here's what science does. Science helps us know what's going on and how to help. So science, like medicine, vaccines, for instance, science provides us with the means to help someone, that or like a splint or penicillin. Science helps us know how to help people who are sick or impaired or need a prosthetic. So now that science has given us ways and means to help, empathetic people will want people to be helped. So I think that the congruence of everything I said helps us when it comes to morality. What do you think of that?
I think science can be used to help, but also to hurt. So I think obviously, like nuclear weapons was invented by science, and guns were invented by science. So I think that science is as a tool is a means to interact with the universe. And once we know what morality is, then being able to interact with the universe will tell us what things we can do which are moral and immoral. But I think that there is a thing beyond human morality. It's not just that apes and Homo sapiens have a particular morality. I think it would be true of all conscious agents in the universe. If there are other life on other planets, I think that there's going to be some pattern to morality. Because, like, if we see throughout human history, morality has been changing in a very particular direction. So, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, workers' rights, ending slavery, uh, child labor laws, all of the ways which morality has changed over time seems to be going in a very specific particular direction. And I think that direction, I think the best way to articulate that is any involuntary imposition of will is immoral, or just forcing people to do things they don't consent to doing is immoral. And a perfect moral world, or one that we could make potentially, is a world where it's just impossible to force anyone to do anything they don't consent to doing. And I think that would be the objective moral principle that would describe what morality should be, not just for humans, but for any beings anywhere in the universe. And I think that is a good way to model morality that we could probably impart to artificial intelligence to give it a basis to act that won't turn us all into paper clips, more or less. And so I think that morality is more than just a particular thing to humans or to apes. And I don't think the similarity between humans and apes is because of our evolution. I think it's more because of some more ingrained patterns in reality about how conscious agents would interact with the world. And I think that with um, even aliens will probably find the same patterns of morality that we find. Like, as we increase in intelligence and resources, I think pretty much all conscious agents will end up having this kind of a thing. Even AI, if we just let AI go in the universe, it'll probably come back with the same kind of a moral understanding like it does with logic or math or whatever. So I think that there is some kind of pattern to morality objectively, just like there is for math and logic. Even though we don't have any proof, there's no like hard evidence for that. The best evidence we have is it's just evolutionary for now. I think in future we will probably discover there's an objective pattern there.
Well, let me be kind then to you, given what you just said. I'll be kind. That is way too optimistic for me. That's all I want to say about that.
For sure. But would you agree that there's probably better or worse models we can give to an AI once we discover it?
I'm not really up on the findings of AI, of recent times. But if you want to program into AI basic morality, the basic morality that and what I think all human species seems, the human species seems to have basic morality, and let them calculate from that. I guess I don't really have an opinion on anything beyond that. I think that um, I was just talking with my wife earlier today. We were talking about someone in QAnon saying that there ought to be killings. I don't know if that's true or not, but we were talking about it just the same. And I said, well, if during the French Revolution, they brought out the guillotine and they killed some of the aristocrats. So it's not beyond possibilities that in the future, not maybe not guillotines, but there could be mass executions in America. So I think that it takes a setback. And even though Steven Pinker might be correct up until now, talking about the Enlightenment, I don't know that there's any reason to suspect that it will continue in a progressive mode. I mean, there's no optimism. The only hope for optimism, I would think, would be if it's to take place, would be in science, because there's no God. Now the Christians have optimism because they think God's bringing everything to fruition at some point in the future. And so things could be getting better and better, or if they have a dispensational theology, it could be getting worse and worse depending on their theology. But for us as non-believers, the only hope we have would be for science to solve our problems, and to hope that empathy is something that continues to be in our genetics and trained in our behavior, in our family relationships. Because if we have empathy, then if we know how to help and we know who's suffering, we're more likely to contribute to helping other people.
All right, I definitely agree. I think that there's no like God being out there to fix everything for us, or no like karma law. I mean, you can still have hope without a God if there's like a karmic field or something that's making everything right. But I think that, yeah, we have to move towards a better world by doing it ourselves. And so using science to make the world a better place. But to make the world a better place, you have to have a definition of better. Like what are we doing to try to make the world a better place? Because
It might evolve. I mean, it might evolve. I mean, I could picture a worse world. I mean, that we actually lived in one. Go back to the Vikings. I've been watching this movies series called the Vikings, which is amazing. But they got along. They did okay, you know, and it's a barbaric time, you know. So I'm not so convinced that it's always going to progress. It is. It has, and I hope it will be.
all right. Like if we go through a massive like nuclear war or something, obviously we're going to regress. But I think the claim is more that if we continue to grow in technology and intelligence and resources, so we don't like go through starvation, then the morality in humans is going to keep going in the same direction it's been going in. So if we continue to go to like the Star Trek realm where we have replicators and can print food and we don't need money anymore, the morality of those people share will be more moral than the morality we share. So our morality is going to be a direct result of the limitations that we have. So we have to do things like um, kill others to produce food, or to hunt and kill to feed ourselves. And those are only seen as justified because they're required for our survival. But once we get to the point where we have like replicators or something, then society will tend to see all of that as immoral. See hunting and killing as immoral. Like even today, in the more Western societies, we see like anti-hunting people as it's animal cruelty. We shouldn't kill animals. We shouldn't have cows because they're conscious agents and we shouldn't kill them. And I think that that's correct. That once we get to a point where we no longer need to do those things, most humans will probably start to see them as being unnecessary evils, like as you mentioned, gratuitous evils. And I think that that will probably continue to be the case throughout the universe. As we gain more resources and we need to do less and less harm to conscious agents, then we'll begin to see any kind of harm that we do to conscious agents as immoral. And I think that that pattern is probably the best descriptor of what the essence of morality is. Like if we can give one principle to describe what morality would be in its totality, I think that would probably describe what it is, which is like forcing any conscious agent to do anything it doesn't consent to doing is probably like the thing that morality will be described of eternally. Like no matter how far we go into the future, that's the one thing that it'll always have in common. And if that is the case, if there is some pattern there, we can just give artificial intelligence that core pattern, and that would be the description of objective morality.
Well, again, that's way too optimistic for me, and it also reminds me that if two people sit down and talk for very long, they're going to find something they disagree with.
Sure.
Just ask yourself this, Tom: how many people do you think it would take to send a nuclear warhead out, and start a totally new World War III? I mean, you're talking about a handful, probably a handful of people, maybe even two, maybe even three, a rogue nation of some sort, or smuggling somewhere. I'm not so sanguine as to think that that's not going to happen, and that, by your own definition, I think, is when we regress. I think you used that word, regress. So I'm not so happy about what science can do. I mean, there's a book called The End by Phil Torres. He and I are friends, and he wrote it's called The End, and he gives well, last I knew we were friends. I think he may not like me, but I like him. The thing is, there's 10 different existential threats that face the Earth, and that's what you find in that book, The End. And there's climate change. Of course, there's nuclear threats. There's virus threats. I mean, I can't remember them all. So keep in mind that for all of your optimism, there are these 10 threats, and I recommend that book very highly.
All right, absolutely. But I think there's a difference between whether we regress and whether there is an objective pattern to morality. So I think that those are two separate things. Even if we regress, it's kind of like climate change. Climate, if we're looking at the climate change models, it goes up and down and up and down and up and down. But overall, there's a big pattern to it. And so I think that's the important thing that we're looking for, is not that whether or not our society regresses. The question is there going to be an objective pattern there, regardless of whether or not we regress occasionally or grow
Now,
occasionally?
fine. What we do agree on, and I think most emphatically, is, and I make this argument, and that it's, I think one of the biggest reasons why we can't agree on ethics worldwide is actually due to religion. I think the religionists, they come up with their own morality, their own habits, their own traditions, and these traditions are eternally binding, and so they have different moralities on homosexuality than sane people do, and they have different moralities on gender and bias and abortion. I mean, like, on war, some of them are barbaric to the core. So other kinds of things. So the reason why we have different moralities is because of religion, and I have set my my sights, my chin, if you will, into eradicating religion, even though I know I won't do it. I won't do it alone, and even if I did, it's not going to happen, because they're not going to accept what I have to say. So once we can get rid of religion, or minimize its influence, which is only the saner approach that we could actually achieve, then what we're going to do in turn is we're going to bring people together in terms of ethics. You would agree with that, right?
Yeah,
So I'm actually helping. I'm helping us have a better ethic, a saner ethic, a unified ethic that everyone can agree on, except for the sociopaths and psychopaths. They are out there. It's brain-based, and they will kill no matter what we do. They will not agree with a sane ethic, and there's lots of them out there. Possibly by the millions, out of 7 billion people, it could be as high as that or more. So those are the people who are always going to cause us trouble, and they don't care. They don't give a damn. But if we can get the rest of us to agree that religion isn't the answer, then they have to work out their own morality, and when they do, we will find that we'll have a better, closer global ethic.
Yeah, I think I would probably disagree. I think religion is a good thing overall. I think that back when it was big, like 2,000-3,000 years ago, I think that the impact religion had in society was a benefit, and that it did bring a lot of people together. It caused a lot of social cohesion, caused a lot of economic growth, less crime, those kinds of things. And so I think that while it's just playing on fallacies that are endemic in human minds, it can be used for good. And so I think instead of trying to get rid of religion, I think we should just have a secular religion, have atheistic religions that are based around the ethics commonalities that you mentioned. We should just have a model of morality and make that the God we worship, essentially, or just this idea of a perfect world. What is the idea of the perfect world? And that should be what we are working towards. And I think that we can use religion as a way to come to a centralized idea around that, and utilize the same human instincts that make religion so powerful in order to make it a force for good in the world, by focusing more on the ideals of this unified ethics of not harming people or not forcing people to do what they don't consent to doing. And we can build a religion that does what the Christian religion should be doing, without all of the mystical stuff.
I don't know. I don't know what you mean. I have to ask. It's okay. I don't suppose I'm supposed to understand everything. I mean, I don't know what a parallel church in a secular community. What are you talking about? A community? I mean, we have a community already. It's called the secular. Supposedly, it's called the secular world. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's fine. That's fine. And I'm not so sure that agreement on a perfect world is required either. I think there are a number of perfect worlds, and to force agreement. You don't agree that forcing anyone to do anything. I'm trying to sift through what you say, and it's I think we can agree that I don't know what we can agree on. I mean, I would think that religion, via religion, is something you take by faith. Now, if I'm wrong on that, and you agree with me that that's not a good idea, then we have no dispute. I think that faith is the problem. I don't care whether it's QAnon. I don't care whether it's all kinds of paranormal claims, or seances, or witch spells or something like that. I think faith is the problem, and I think that anyone who takes something on faith is going to be misled and could take us down a bad road. So evidence-based policies, evidence-based things that convinces people because of the evidence, then I'm on. If that's what you're arguing for, then I'm all for that.
So I don't think faith is necessarily an issue. I think that, like, you can believe whatever you want if it makes you happy. I'm happy with that. I don't mind people having faith. I think that making decisions that have real world impacts based on faith is bad. We should only use evidence to make decisions that have real world impacts. But I don't think believing things on faith is necessarily a problem.
Okay, fine. I agree. I mean, I'm not going to tell people they can't believe. That's what I agree with you. We shouldn't force them into believing anything. I think if you can't convince them with evidence, and then you just can't convince them. And if they choose to act on their beliefs by having 900 people drink some poison like Jim Jones did, then you're going to try to intervene as much as possible if you can.
For sure.
And stop.
But I do think that there are benefits to religion, and I guess faith too, that we know that human beings are motivated by things that are irrational, fallacies, biases, illusions, delusions, hallucinations, misconceptions. There's tons of these, but they do motivate people. They motivate people to take action towards things. And so I think instead of ignoring those or saying that we shouldn't use them whatsoever, I think it might be better to use the same fallacies, biases, illusions, delusions to motivate people in a positive manner rather than a negative manner, because they're already motivated in a negative manner. What?
To harness them in an attempt to make the world a better place. I think we're already doing that. I don't see how we're not really. I mean, like, if I can, for instance, I learn from the liberal Christians about Christianity. I think that they help me in dealing with the fundamentalists, and I refer to them. I mean, so I'm harnessing their scholarship, as you will. I'm harnessing what they say about conservative evangelical, even moderate evangelicals, and I'll quote them, and I'll say, James McGrath and I, we agree about all this and all that, and I'm trying to move them down the line. So I in other ways, and if they can help us with the homeless or something like that, of course, I harness their attempts. Never say, have a big tent, have a big tent in your political and social communities, but never fail to inject truth whenever you can. And those are the harsh realities that faith, unevidenced faith, blind faith, is always to be eschewed if you want to have an adult rational life. And they'll probably never all accept that, of course. So.
Well, that's the thing I think I might be disagreeing with, because I think that, let's say I have faith for this best of all possible worlds I'm describing, that objective morality is real. I don't have any evidence for it, but I have faith that there is a best description or a best model of morality, and that world is like the best of all possible worlds that I described, where it's impossible to force anyone to do anything you don't consent to doing, and that's the world that we should try to achieve. And if I have faith of this, the truth of this, I will work towards trying to build it. So I work towards trying to make a world where you can't force people to do things they don't consent to doing. And that would seem to be like a good thing. So like the Jainist faith, the Jains are extreme nonviolent. They don't kill anything. They don't eat flies because they don't want to kill them. They don't kill spiders. And that's because they have faith in their religious beliefs. I don't think that their religious beliefs are true, but their faith causes them to act in a way that makes the world a better place. And so I think that we can use faith in a similar way to inspire people to do moral actions, even if it isn't based in truth. Like Harry Potter, people are inspired by Harry Potter to build communities, which is good for the world. And so I think that you don't need to have everything based in fact and reason, unless you're making like actual effects in the world specifically related to science or physical reality. If you're just building communities or inspiring people to act in a moral way, that's the part where I think it's totally fine to have faith. It's only a problem when you try to override scientific facts with your faith. And so I don't see faith as an inherent problem. I see it as a spice of life, I guess, where it can be good and can be bad. And the trick is to find the applications where it's useful and can benefit people, and to use it for those things, while not applying it in the areas where it doesn't, where it has a negative impact, such as overriding scientific facts.
Okay, I hear what you're saying now, and I think that you're right. I think that we're having a word definition problem, and that's all, which isn't anything. Because I would use the word hope in place of you using faith. You hope for the future, and your hope is based on evidence, I think. And that if you can have a secularized Jainism, a secularized Buddhism, both possible and both being done, that that can be a good thing, and I have no reason to say otherwise. Faith, by my definition, is always blind faith. So that's we'd have to talk about that, and I think that defines a lot of what we disagree with about other people and religions and paranormal claims. Faith, blind faith. If I were to ask you, are you against blind faith? I'm sure you would say yes. I'm against that. But your hope is that for the future, and if you use that word, then I'm down with it. Seriously.
Well, what do you mean? What do you mean by blind faith? How do you define blind faith?
Well, like the Heaven's Gate cult in the 94, 95 era, Applewhite, he convinced some people to take some poison because a ship was following behind Hale's comet. And if we die, we're going to go up to be in that comet, and we're going to ride the universe. And so he convinced, I think, 9 people to take the cyanide, and they all died. And they're not up there right now flying around somewhere because it's blind. There's no evidence for it except for Applewhite's, pontifications. That's blind. Blind is unevidenced faith. And if you could agree with that, then we agree. And I think we agree anyway. It's just a word definition. That's a problem. And I don't have to convince you of my definition. You don't have to convince me of your definition for us both to agree.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I think that, like, even if we take blind faith can definitely be used for bad things, like in the case of the Jamestown massacre. But it can also be used for good things, right? Because Jains have blind faith that their religious beliefs are correct. And because they have blind faith, they won't kill anything. They think that it's immoral to kill anything.
Blind faith, as I've described it, is always bad in one sense. Now, it's not always bad in that chance happens. It's not always bad because you can get lucky. You can, if for no other reason, because of chance, you can get lucky. So it's not always bad. And you can get lucky a number of times. So it's not always bad. But it's bad as a method. It's bad as a principle of knowing. It's bad as a motivation to do things. That's what I'm saying.
Well, that's the part I'm not sure I understand, because I think that like the Jains, I think, have blind faith in their religion, and there's no basis, no evidence whatsoever. They just believe their religious beliefs. But because they do that, they act in a very moral way. I think Jains are the most moral human beings on the planet because they don't kill anything.
They're lucky. Yeah, they're lucky. Yeah, I say they're lucky. I mean, there's no basis for that luck. That's all I'm saying. I think you should agree. I don't think there should be a problem. I think you say, yeah, people get lucky. They can have a completely good basis morality without, did I say basis? They can have a completely good morality without a basis based on luck. They just happen to be raised right, or something. Their whole lifestyle can be good just simply because of that, and it's luck. They've never thought it through, and that. But I'm talking about if you want to think things through, if you want to have a basis, some kind of basis, reasonable basis, because we're reasonable creatures, then always base it on something beyond just simply blind faith. You have some evidence for it. You do, Tom. I'm not saying you don't. You have some evidence in your hope. I mean, except for the type of glitches that could happen with an existential crisis, and if nothing else.
Well, I think the way I see it is like, blind faith is a tool that motivates people, and the irrational side is definitely using that to get people on their side. But if we don't use that, and we only use rationality, we never use blind faith, then they're going to have an advantage, because I think that they're using a tool that we're lacking. And so I think if we can use blind faith and we can cater it to specifically be towards things that are moral, like a moral world or Jainist morality or something, and we can try to promote those kinds of blind faith as being good because they benefit the world, rather than blind faith about like heaven or hell or whatever. I think that is a good tool that we can use, rather than just simply eschewing blind faith altogether. I think that there are positive usages, and I get your point about the luck, because since it has no basis, there's no reason to think that one blind faith is more likely or rational than another blind faith, and so adopting the correct one is simply luck, because there's no way to establish one being better than the other. But I think that we can use or promote certain particular versions of blind faith, like Jainism, as being more moral and benefiting people, rather than simply saying all blind faith is bad. Because I wouldn't agree with that. I think some blind faith can be good, and determining which ones are good is probably a thing that we should be doing and promoting those, rather than saying they're all bad.
I'll let you have a last word on this, but I just want to, I think, reiterate, if you accept anything on blind faith, then you've adopted a method, a procedure that could be sidetracked by some other blind faith item. You could be sidetracked because you have not developed good thinking skills based on evidence to accept the next guy who comes around and say, "Hey, I've got the truth," and you don't have to need any evidence. Come follow me. We go into a commune. We'll dance, have lots of sex, be happy, and oh, there's somebody we need to go kill over there, like Sharon Tate, and let's go kill them because we're all happy and we're having a lot of good time, and you don't need you've already proved yourself not having the ability to think through things, so I'm going to tell you what to believe. I mean, you don't tell anybody what. I'm not talking about forcing them into belief. You just have the answers. So no, I can't accept that, but I think we agree that that's the point of contention, whether you call that faith or hope. And I think it's called hope, and it doesn't really matter to me if you would continue calling it faith, and you probably will. So I'm okay with that, because you claim to have evidence for your morality, right? So
No.
you're saying, well, I thought.
Well, I have a hypothesis. I said there's no strong evidence yet. The best evidence for morality is just evolution. So there's no evidence of objective morality. But I agree with everything you said there, that using blind faith leaves people open to the next blind faith thing, because there's no way to distinguish them. And I totally agree. And I think that that's a good thing for us, because there's already people using blind faith in a bad way. And so why don't we become that other guy that you mentioned that says, you know what, we have a blind faith, or we can go have sex and stuff in the woods, and promote Jainism or perfect morality or something along those lines. And so I think that we can use morality in the exact way you just described, because right now I think faith is used in a mostly negative way, and we can get people to go more in the positive direction with faith instead of the negative direction. So I agree that using blind faith is not a reliable way to truth, and it can be manipulated by people with other blind faith assertions. But that's what I just want to say, like, we can be that guy. We can be the guy that promotes the blind faith of the good kind to try to drag people away, because people are already using it. Now, I agree, if no one was ever using it, we probably shouldn't open the door to using blind faith as a justification. But because our people are already using blind faith in bad ways all around the world, we should use it true, and we should try to move people in the positive direction with it, instead of the drink the Kool-Aid direction, instead of just ignoring it altogether.
So we could be all I can do to digest this is, so you could do the same thing as a leader in other cults, and you would simply say, here's the way we're going to live, and you have some evidence for your faith, and so you're helping that you're taking idiots. I know I use
it's true. It's true.
I use a pejorative term, and you're saying, come with me, let's live this way. Well, why? Because I said so, or I think it's the right thing, or you can just mumble a few ohms in the sky and something like that, and then, oh, okay, yeah, let's all follow Tom. You know, you're a good guy. Let's go. And you're saying so that we can make a world a better place by following good things, even though they're doing it for irrational reasons. Is that what
Yes.
you're doing?
Yes, because there's a large number of people who will not do things for rational reasons. And so if we want to utilize those people for better in the world, we have to use the irrational reasons that motivate them instead of trying to motivate them with science.
Well, then I got my eye on you, Tom Jump. I'm waiting for you to have a group, and then I want to see what happens to that group. A lot of times people who have a group like that, unbeknownst to their initial honest and integrity, it transforms them. People who with that kind of power to have people believe for irrational reasons surround them eventually abuse that power. In fact, I haven't seen that. I've never seen it not happen. So you might, I mean, in all the case studies I've ever seen, the person like that who uses idiots will tend, not you, of course. No, you are going to be different. I know you are. You just seem so much honest than others. But I have my suspicions. You have that kind of power, and before you know, or money. Sometimes money does it. You get people to do what you want, not tell them what to do, but you get them to because of your personality, and you have a fine personality, a smile, and you're intelligent. I mean, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you abuse that power? What would keep you from doing that? And this is hypothetical. Can we get off that topic?
Yep. Okay. Well, yeah. I think it's a great point.
We're all throwing. It's your moderator. You're the program host. You do what you want, though. I want to talk about miracles.
Sure. Let's talk about miracles.
It's an interesting conversation. I don't have anything else to say on it. I mean, I think it's just interesting. Thank you for that. But what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to make people think differently about miracles, and when I can do that, I can get them not to believe in God. I can get them to be evidence-based people, and I can get them to use the same criteria across the board for other types of things that they want, morality and things like that, and assess current claims to miracles today, because most of the people who believe in miracles do so because they believe in the Bible. And most of the reason why they believe in the Bible is because it's a Christian culture, and they were taught to believe, or they were taught inside a Christian culture. And there's been outliers who adopt Christianity, who were born in a different faith or a different country. I know that, but and the focus is simply to share with them what's the objective evidence for the miracles in the Bible, like a hand that turned leprous and then became normal again of Moses, or a burning bush. These are stories, or a snake that talked, a donkey talked, a sun that stood still. And these are the stories that people believe. Well, what's the evidence for? Well, I focus on the miracle of the virgin birth, because if you look in Matthew, the first chapter or two of Matthew, it says very explicitly that Joseph, the alleged father, was convinced Mary was telling the truth, that she had a baby sired by God. But Joseph was convinced that Mary was telling the truth because of a dream. I think it says in Matthew's chapter 1 or 2, it uses the word dream 3 times, at least 2. I know for 2. It was definitely a dream. It wasn't a vision. He didn't think it through. He got a dream, and it said, believe Mary. Now, that's one thing, to believe in a miracle because of a dream. It's entirely subjective. I can dream all kinds of things. But for the gospel writer to write that down as if it's important, because we find that in Gospel of Matthew. Well, what do we find there? We find Matthew uses that as evidence that Mary was telling the truth. Now, how would Matthew ever research it into himself? I mean, how would anyone research that for themselves? The only people they can contact would be Mary, because Joseph was convinced in a dream. And there's so many suspicions arise at that point. You actually doubt the whole Gospel of Matthew. I mean, I'm talking about the resurrection and all the stories of transfiguration and miracles in there. You have to doubt the whole Gospel of Matthew. Because if that's the kind of research that supposedly went into writing the stories, that is, Matthew took Joseph's dream as evidence, then you have to be suspicious of everything. And that's where I start. I start with the virgin birth. There's all kinds of reasons not to believe the virgin birth. One is that the virgin birth were pagan stories to begin with. And so then we have a conversation about objective evidence, what counts for that and what doesn't. And all we have in the Gospels are we don't have anyone's personal testimony of anything in the Gospels. None. We have the author of Mark who writes about them, and we have plagiarized Matthew and Luke, which adopts a large portion of Mark's gospel into their stories. And Luke doesn't say, "Hey, I was there." Matthew doesn't, and Mark doesn't. No one who writes the gospel. So what we have is basically Mark, and then Matthew and Luke, and we could go on, but that's enough to whet your appetite. The thing is, just because someone says, or we can get back to Keener because we mentioned Keener earlier, just because someone says, I experienced a miracle, doesn't mean we should take that person's word for it. We need objective evidence if we're talking about an extraordinary event of a miraculous kind. I could go on. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, we actually have a question from the super chat, just real quick. Question from James Earl. It is, what is your morality about eating other animals when you could eat vegetables? Maybe you are a vegetarian, ? T-Jump makes it clear he is immoral for eating animals. What is your stand?
It's like asking me what kind of sex I like. I have no obligation to answer a question like that, to be quite honest.
Gotcha. Yeah, my position is I think killing any conscious agent is immoral, including animals. So I think it's immoral to eat animals, but I still do. So I'm immoral. So that's my position.
You would like my chapter in the book on horrendous suffering then, on animal suffering. You'd like that.
For sure. All right. So about miracle claims. I think in history, the most historical claims are pretty bad. Like most historical documents don't have eyewitness testimonies. There's miracle claims in most of them. Tacitus, Josephus, Plinius, Pliny the Elder, Pliny the Younger. There's lots and lots of miracle claims. Like they mention Romulus and Remus being raised by a wolf to found Rome. Obviously, we don't trust that's true, but we do. But that doesn't mean we distrust everything they say. It doesn't mean we say that the entire works of all of the historians of ancient times are bad simply because they include a few miracle claims. So why would we do the same for the Bible authors? So they include some miracle claims that aren't very well researched, just like all of the historians at the time period. Why would we doubt everything they said because of that?
Good question. Herodotus is called the father of history because he actually tried to do historical research. But in his writings, he talks about miracles of a fish that resurrected, for instance, as one example. So he has that strewn in there, but yet he's still called the father of history because he actually, used some good methods to verify his history. Now, and the main thing is what's corroborated, like an archaeological dig, or I saw the actual handwritten letter, or the coin has the imprint of, Caesar Augustus. Whatever kinds of things can be found, maybe exhuming remains of this person died of a skull wound. That's what happened. That's what he did, and not everywhere, not every case, because they were largely pre-scientific, superstitious people. But when it comes to history, that's really quite a subject there in itself. History is hard to verify. Bottom line, history is hard to verify. Very hard, because some eras only have minted coins as an artifact, or maybe a sword that got cut or damaged or something in some way. So there's very little, and maybe handwritten letters of like what you ordered at the grocery store or something like that, or the market. So history is hard to verify. So how much more difficult is it to verify a historical claim of a miracle? So it's these kinds of things, and they litter the archives, that historians themselves say this. They say a miracle is by far an improbable event, otherwise it wouldn't be called a miracle. And so by nature of the very case, that a miracle is something we can't even investigate. we can't study it. We can't conclude it's probable when by its very nature, it's improbable. So historians will write about Jesus, and they'll say, and then the Jesus event occurred, and they'll leave it at that. They won't talk about what happened, but they'll call it the Jesus event. And what that means is that whatever happened, whatever happened when Jesus arrived or what he did or anything, then all of a sudden that changed everything. And then they'll go on to write about Christians if they wanted to write about Christians or the reaction to Christianity in the Jews. So you can't claim, history can never verify a miracle. I mean, maybe I haven't seen one. So miracles are the least probable explanation for almost any claimed event. I mean, they used to think, the sun got blackened out. It's a miracle. Well, now we know about eclipses, beyond. So history can never conclude a miracle took place. And that goes for the Bible. Boom, just like that.
So the natural question that most theists are asked is, well, so you're saying that there's no way to believe in miracles. What evidence would you take to believe the historical miracle happened?
Well, they argue in a circle. That's a great question. I like that. They argue that if there's a God, then miracles can happen. All right, I get that. Okay, fine. Yeah, if there's a God, then miracles can happen. Okay, that puts the possibility of them happening on the boards, so to speak. It doesn't say that God did a miracle. Like if you were to ask Jews whether Jesus was raised from the dead, then almost all of them, but not everyone, but almost all of them would say, no, Jesus did not arise from the dead. Well, wait. You believe, actually, if you can go back in time, there were 8 million Jews alive at the time of Jesus. There are 2 million in Palestine. And overwhelming numbers of them rejected Christianity, Jesus, and his resurrection. But they believed in God. They knew their prophecies like no one. They believe God does miracles, and yet they were there and they didn't believe. So it's a really good and interesting line of argumentation to say, well, why not? Especially since history can't give up the ghosts too easily. I lost the sight of your question just a minute ago here. What was that again? Can you repeat yourself?
Yeah, the question is if history can't verify miracle claims, that means that there could never be evidence for miracles. And the question is what evidence could we possibly see that could make historical miracles reasonable to believe?
All right. There's two things I want to say about that. And I was getting to the first one. God can make anything a miracle. So you read a story of wine being created out of grape juice. Yeah, and so you think the miracle of Cana happened. Why? Because God happens and God can do anything. So God is required to circumvent the results of history. History says it's improbable. We talk about the Jesus event. That's known. That's sure. So how do you believe that miracle? Well, because there's a God. Well, how do you get to God? Because I believe in miracles. It's really interesting how circular that really is. Because in order to believe in the Christian God, you have to believe in the miracles that the Christian God supposedly did. But you can't believe in the miracles that are recorded in the Bible unless you already believe in God. So which comes first? And it's a really important dilemma there. If God comes first, well, which God? It can't be the Jewish God. It can't be the Muslim God. It can't be maybe the Hindu or the Buddhist, deities. It can't, because the obvious answer to that question would be no. Those miracles didn't take place because my God doesn't do those miracles. So you have to start with the Christian God, and then you can believe in the miracles. But how do you get to believe in the God of the miracles? You have to say that there's evidence for those miracles actually taking place. That is, Jesus' resurrection, the virgin birth, anything else. But you can't believe in those miracles because history won't allow you to do so. I mean, really, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Once you eat it, it's gone. So God first or miracles first? And so when you ask about what historical evidence could actually prove a God exists, well, I actually wrote about that. I get offered several different things. Let me just give you the main line of what I would have required. Since history cannot show that a miracle happened with any degree of probability at all, because the probabilities are always that any other explanation is more useful than that a miracle took place. Then the best case scenario is to do them in our age, to have waited to the year 2022. Now, let me get to this by a long way around. Christians say that Jesus' death atones for the sins of all the people in the past, all the Old Testament people, all the people who had just become human before Adam and Eve came around, because Jesus' death covers all sins, both present and future and past, because that's how Abraham gets saved, and Jacob and Moses and others, because they get saved through Jesus' blood the same way that you do today. So if Jesus' death could atone for the people in the past, then why not move his, and if that has anything to do with salvation in the first place, which I doubt, it's barbaric. So then why don't we move Jesus' death into the future, to the year 2020, when we could verify it with cell phone records and audio recordings and TV appearances, and videotaping of all of his miracles. His birth could be documented. I mean, his death could be like on scale for everyone to see. And so we wait to the future, till the year, because we need to see it. We need to see it. And if you have like 1,000 videos all showing the same thing, then it's hard to say if this was any collusion, like they made this shit up. See, so there are cases where God could have provided the evidence. He was just a person of the past, basically a deity of the past that actually never existed, because if he did exist and he did have the smarts, he would have waited to at least 2020, things that couldn't ever be denied even into the future. And then people could say, and still believe or not believe, based on whether or not their sins, according to the Christian theology, based on whether or not they'd rather sin than believe, then that would be the evidence required for belief. Sorry, that's a long answer.
Yeah, I think that's right. So my answer is usually that for any historical claim of miracles, in order to be justified in believing that it actually happened, you would need evidence that they can happen today. So like if somebody historically claimed that they saw a unicorn, like a magical white horse with a horn that can do magic or whatever, the only way to be justified in believing that rationally actually historically happened is that we would need to find evidence that unicorns exist today, like fossils or something, to show that they did. And then once we have evidence they exist today, then we can infer maybe in the past that actually did happen and it wasn't just made up by their imagination. And so I think the same thing would apply to miracles, that if we could show miracles existed today, like if you prayed to God and limbs were healed or whatever, then that would be good evidence to believe that maybe the miracles that are attested to in the Bible also happened. And so if we
Now,
could show miracles happen today, then we could infer that they could have happened in the past.
now there's a catch-22 there, and I'm sorry that it's the case. I mean, I'm actually sorry. I wish I could do better. Well, stop creating all these dilemmas, Loftus, because I don't like them. You're trying to pin me in a hole. I'm just trying to be reasonable. If those kind of things can be verified in today's world, let's talk about the pillar of salt that supposedly Lot's wife turned into. Let's suppose we can find a pillar of salt in today's world and test it for DNA, and it tested positive for female DNA. Or let's say that we somehow preserved the foreskin of Jesus. Serious, no joke. And they actually, in some churches, there's 3 or 4 of them in Europe that have competing claims to having the foreskin of Jesus. Serious, look it up. So, but if we had that, and we also had a living line of ancestry for Jesus's, it says Mary and Joseph had other sons and daughters, or he had brothers. So they had a lineage that stretched down into today. We could test that up against the foreskin. that'd be one thing, and we also have evidence of the salt, the pillar of salt. Well, this is actually Lot's wife. But once we prove such things can happen naturally, then all of a sudden the miraculous nature of it is gone. If we can prove that, name a miracle, like an arm could regrow. Then that wouldn't be a miracle anymore. You had mentioned that wouldn't be a miracle anymore. That you wouldn't say all of a sudden, well, I can see then that God did that way in the past. No, we just saw it happen now, and it was done naturally, like say a star's arm would regrow. I don't know if I answered your question. I tend to ramble sometimes, but I got so much to say, and I kind of step all over myself. But it seems like either way they go, whether they start with miracles, they start with God, they have no basis for belief based on history. And if you can show something happened in history, it's in today's world, then it's no longer a miracle. That's what I wanted to
I
say.
don't think I would agree with that, because I'd say that if it only happened when you prayed to God, say you pray to Jesus, someone's arm regrows, and it only regrows when you pray to Jesus, I think that would be great evidence of miracles. So I don't think it's impossible to have evidence of miracles today. I
Okay.
think that it
All right.
depends on like the conditions under which it happens. And so I think if we could show miracles happen today under when you pray to Jesus and only to Jesus or something, then that would be
Good point.
reason to believe the miracles in the Bible that is written by Jesus or for Jesus also happened. So I think
Yeah,
that
that's good.
I think it's possible to justify the miracles in the Bible if we saw miracles done under the same conditions today. Just like if like someone in history claimed they saw a unicorn, we wouldn't believe them until we found fossils of unicorns. And then once we found fossils of unicorns, we'd be like, oh, well, maybe he did actually see a unicorn because we have the fossils.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I guess I was talking about what if we saw a limb grow naturally,
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but yeah, I mean, and we still have to want those kind of miracles done in the presence of people like Michael Shermer, James Randi, and Joe Nichols, and maybe magicians like Penn and Teller to see if they can be fooled. And then
Right.
once we do that, like see, Johnny Carson had James Randi on his program, and he debunked Uri Geller because he couldn't bend spoons that James Randi brought on the set. They would say, well, with all these lights and cameras and all these skeptics around, I can't do it. I just can't do it. I can only do it in church and in a holy roller moment.
Yeah, I
But
remember
we'd
that.
have to still investigate those kinds of events and not just simply take a magician's trick if that's what happens.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We have to do controlled trials to make sure it happened at a higher rate than chance for like Jesus, and not just for atheists to know that it actually was something related to a miracle. We definitely have to test it more than just see it happening once. That would definitely not be
Now,
enough.
now there are truly some interesting cases which haven't yet been explained. I think that Joe Nickell, I heard him talk live. He said, I'm a paranormal investigator, but I don't. My goal is not to debunk um, these claims. They'll call me and they'll ask me to come over and investigate. He says, I truly want to know, and he says there are cases where I just can't explain, and that doesn't mean anything except that I can't explain them. I mean, how do you all of a sudden conclude from his cases? He's got a big book called The Science of Miracles. Um, and if you're going to be fair-minded, you just simply say, I can't explain it. And I think it's consistently possible to say, I don't believe miracles happen, and yet I can't explain this one or that one.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think that's why it needs to like my criterion of evidence is novel testable predictions. I think that if you can successfully make novel testable predictions with any hypothesis, then that hypothesis has evidence. So you can say, if I believe God exists and God will do miracles, I pray to God, and then at a rate of, I don't know, 60%, he'll heal an arm or something, and it happens and only under those conditions. And yeah, it's great evidence. So as long as you can make novel testable predictions, I think that is what is the key to evidence and counting as an explanation.
Yeah, but even though there are a few that Joe Nichols can't explain, I mean, he explains so much, and these people, they talk about all the kinds of criteria that would cause us to believe in a miracle, and it just doesn't happen. I mean, it just all at best, from what I know, is that there are unexplainable cases. I mean, that's all I know. I mean, that there are some unexplainable cases, but you can't take the leap from something that's unexplainable because you might be ignorant of the cause to claiming that my particular Christian sect deity exists.
Right. That would be an argument from ignorance, saying we don't know, therefore God. That's
Right. Right.
one of the fallacies. So Eric Hovind does that all the time. You can't say you know, therefore I'm right, because I can claim I know.
Right. Right.
Well, awesome. We have been going for about an hour and a half. We have some questions from the audience, if you don't mind.
Okay.
All right. Question from JJ. Can do anything to survive, reproduce the race be a morality?
I'll let
These
you
are,
have that one.
yeah, I think.
You have to translate it for me first.
After what?
You'll have to translate that one for me.
Oh,
What is he
gotcha.
talking about?
He's asking can a moral system be derived simply by doing whatever it takes to survive? That's utilitarianism. So yes, that is considered a moral system. I don't think it's right, but yes, there is a moral system that is based on doing whatever it takes to survive, which is called utilitarianism. And I don't think it's perfectly moral because it justifies lots of evil things. Like John mentioned the mixed cases where you have to like kill one to save five. Is that moral? I would say no. I'd say killing any number ever is always going to be immoral. And doing one immoral thing to prevent a greater immoral thing isn't a moral thing. It's just a less immoral thing.
It's an interesting. I have to say, it's an interesting question because it's just an interesting question because the fittest survive. I mean, I don't think we have to consciously do anything. It just naturally happens, in the real world, and we do have a fight to stay alive. We are in a fight against death. We don't want to die. So, but I don't know how far you can get with that, except simply I need to survive. I need to live, and I need to procreate, and I need to have my children, as I explained earlier, and I think Tom agrees if we interchange our words. I think I want to have my kids survive. I just want them to survive, and so I don't know what more you can get on out of an ethic from that exactly.
For sure. All right. Next question is from James Earl. Have you dug a shelter yet? Asked in a humoristic way. For the end of the world, I imagine.
My former wife's father had a bomb shelter. I mean, he really had one. But that was in the World War II era. He truly did, and it was interesting. You would it was in the basement, and there's a brick concrete blocks that went in a circle until you're in the inner core. So that you had plenty of, you could escape real quick, but it also had enough bricks to keep you safe. But no, no, it's funny.
I'm working on mine. I'm making a nice one, geothermal, powered by the core of the world. It's gonna work. It's gonna work great. Next question is from Max Rokes. How is that not just dialectical materialism? Dialectical materialism is like a Karl Marx thing. I don't subscribe to dialectical materialism, so it's not my view.
Marx isn't. Marx shouldn't be made out to be a bad guy. I think that he wants the proletariat to rule, and rather than the bourgeoisie. He wants us to unite as humanity, and that he thinks. Actually, I think the more I talk about him, the more I think that you may, Tom, actually be that way. It's based on Hegel, who said you had a thesis and an antithesis, and then you had you had a thesis. History progressed by two opposites which merged, and then another one opposite came and merged, and history progresses like that. And he based the materialism on that. So I think it's a history of hope, and that the ruling class wouldn't rule. From what I remember, but
Gotcha.
I wouldn't know.
Max Rose asks, how do you explain non-religious people who disagree with you?
Well, they're idiots. No. How do I explain it? Because I could be wrong. I mean, I admit that. I try to think in terms of the probabilities, and when I say something is the case, I'm always thinking of a probability factor, but I just don't say what that probability is. Like, for instance, I think this or I think that. But if anybody were to stop me in the middle of a sentence and say, well, what's the probability of that? Then I could tell you what probability level it would be. I might say, well, that's about 70% the case, or 80%, or 99%. And so unless I'm asked that figure, you don't know. So you have to ask me on a specific case. You know, I think that conservative Christianity has basically a 99% chance of being wrong. 99.999 actually. I don't know how many nines I'd put back to that, but a lot. There's a chance that it might be the case, but I'm pretty emphatic about it.
Gotcha. James asks, do you have a good argument for converting atheists?
To what?
I think to
Oh,
religion,
I mean,
like other,
to a different religion?
yeah, like because you mentioned that the strongest argument for theism is the problem of suffering. What would be the strongest argument against atheism?
Oh, I don't think there are any strong arguments for convincing non-believers to believe. If you harken back to what I said earlier, I think faith is always blind faith. That means that anytime I believe something, it's always not based on the probabilities. So what would convince me to be a believer in what there might be a spirit somewhere. I mean, a spiritual reality somewhere. I don't know. It's hard to calculate that. It doesn't matter really because um, it, it it could be 1%, 2%, maybe 5%. You know, I doubt it though. It wouldn't be a personal spirit. It wouldn't be a spirit that has ears or a means of communicating. And if you could detect it, then it wouldn't be a spirit, a true spiritual reality. So I don't know of any argument that would convince a non-believer in rationally to accept any particular belief. Myself personally, I could be wrong.
Um, you Someone asked, do you believe in evolution?
I know it's a fact. I think I accept what people say when they say all you have to do is understand it. There's no belief to it because once you understand it, you see how it works. It makes so much sense in every different field of science that touches on it. I say that the highest level of authority on matters about the world is scientists working in a given field. And if those scientists working in a given field have a consensus about something, then it's a fact. And I don't think anyone but scientists can dispute that fact. That means you can't read up on quantum mechanics and enter that debate. Because what you can do is you can read one guy who says one thing and you can say, well, I agree with him, but you're not a scientist. And if the consensus of scientists all agree about a certain fact about anything, cosmology, light waves, if they all of them working or evolution, if they all have a consensus about them, then you have to wait as a non-scientist until they change the consensus for you to change your mind or to use it as any evidence. And since consensuses among scientists don't change very often at all, now they have in the past, more likely more often in the past than now. And now it's on the frontiers of science, not on the hard facts of like years and decades and centuries of the past that they're all solid kind of consensus about. Then you can't enter that debate. You can't say, well, I believe my Bible, so this scientist right over here, number X, he disagrees with the consensus. You can't do that because you're not a scientist. You have to wait till the consensus changes.
Gotcha. Woody asks if I can answer the same question about the best argument to convert atheists to theists. I think that most people, the fear of death is probably the biggest factor in converting people. Like, what can I see my loved ones after I die? What happens after I die? The fear of becoming nothingness or whatever is probably the biggest contributing factor to those who are converted to a religious belief because they want to believe in an afterlife. And most materialistic atheist positions don't offer that. And so I think that because they want to have hope in that afterlife, they convert as a way to try to cling on to life after death.
But you're interesting, Tom. You're an interesting character. I'm glad to talk to you. I'm glad to listen to you. But you would also have said that you can use um, um, irrationality to
Motivate people.
motivate people. So that goes with what you said earlier. Whereas I was answering the question from a what's reasonable or probable. It's interesting.
Yeah. All right. Gray asks, would you beat William Lane Craig in a fight?
I think I could probably take him in a debate. He's been debating ever since high school, and he was on a debate team, and probably has had at least a debate every month for like decades or so. So in terms of debate judges, if they were to judge scorers, had a scoring sheet and do what debate judges do, then he would score more points because he's just so good at it. Hopefully in a debate I could score a couple big points, and I certainly. Well, I'll tell you, I'm going to be participating in a debate March 13th, and I'll announce it later. I'm going to do something kind of different. I don't want to show my hand just yet. It's going to be from what I envision it. It's going to be something that people won't be able to unhear once they hear it, and it has the potential of doing a number on people's faith, and that's why I aim at. I aim at because I think people are better off without faith, as I said earlier, blind faith. So you'll see that. Keep looking for it. I hope maybe Tom mentions it. Hopefully I do good at it. But as far as debating William Lane Craig, he's just really good. I'm just hoping that I can beat him on substance, and I think I can. But I know that believers will be more willing to accept whatever he says. So as far as how they will come away from it, they probably will side in his favor. I'm just hoping that others don't.
Yeah, I'd like to debate him. I'd like to take the philosophical approach, see if my philosophical arguments could beat his. That would be fun.
I bet so. I'd like to see that.
Me too. Get him to do it. Send him an email. Be like, debate TJo. JJ asks, evidence is more important than consensus. Do you agree?
Well, yes. Are you saying something I supposedly said that disagreed with that?
Yeah, I think he's going off of what you said earlier about if there's a consensus of scientists, you are not allowed to disagree with that consensus because you're not an expert in the field. And so in that point, you have to trust what they say and not look at the evidence because it's up to them and you don't get an opinion on it, kind of a thing.
I did say that, didn't I? What I mean is people who use the Bible and say evolution is false because my Bible says otherwise, you really don't have the qualifications to debate the consensus of scientists on evolution. Okay, that for one, that's one thing, that kind of thing I would say, because that's usually what is at stake. But in other things as well, I mean, if there's a consensus, a wide consensus, that's the highest authority on any given issue about the universe or the world, deep seas, the skies, earth geology, if the consensus of scientists all agrees, and you find this one scientist over here or two who say otherwise, you can't decide between them. That's what I'm saying. You can't decide between the consensus of scientists, overwhelming, especially if it's an overwhelming consensus of scientists, against a different science or two. It's a different scientist. You don't have the ability to decide between them. Now, the one or two or even three scientists outside the overwhelming bounds of scientists who agree might be right. Now, I'm not saying they might be right. That's how science is overturned. But what will overturn the consensus of the scientists will be the evidence. And that means these two or three scientists out here who disagree with the consensus will have to do some convincing of the people who hold to the consensus. And you have no way of judging that. That's all I'm saying. It's almost standard. It almost goes to reason. You don't have the abilities to judge between them. So you can't say scientist X disagrees with the consensus and I'm going with scientist X, and so therefore I believe in God. You can't do that. You have to say to be honest and with integrity, you just simply would have to say the consensus of scientists says otherwise, or I don't know. But you can't say I know enough to judge between them.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I think that the consensus of experts are the ones who are qualified to assess the evidence. And so even if you're presented the evidence, you shouldn't take your interpretation of the evidence as being better than the expert's interpretation. And so trusting the consensus of the expert's interpretation of that evidence is more trustworthy than you being provided with the evidence and trying to make your own interpretation.
Well said. It's really kind of important because I think so many times, like when it comes to vaccines, like we went through COVID and everybody, they had these doctors saying otherwise. The overwhelming consensus can't be disputed by you or by me. I mean, these other scientists, the outliers, they might be right. See, I can't say they're right, but all I can say is I know what the consensus is, and usually, most often, they're right. They could be wrong, but usually, most often, they're right.
For sure. All right, I think that's it for the questions. It was a great conversation. Really appreciate you coming on. Do you want to give any links or references where people can find out more about your work and your books?
Yeah, I blog. These books, they're really good. I blog at debunkingchristianity.com. And David Madison, he's a biblical scholar from Boston University. He writes with me, and it's a pretty good blog. We share a lot of things that some things are current, but mostly about Christianity and science and philosophy.
And where can people find out about your upcoming debate that you mentioned that you don't want to talk too much about?
Well, on my blog or Facebook, become a follower on Facebook. I might have exhausted my friends list, but you can be a follower there. I'll update it. I'll post it, somewhere. Yeah. My blog or Facebook, yeah, or Twitter.
Sounds good. Thanks again for coming on. It was a really great conversation. Appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Thank you for calling. Thank you.